Welcome to this um, welcome to this live about closing the bones. Now let me just find out how to invite. So I need to invite my friend Laura Leongomez, and I just need to find live on Instagram. So I've just invited Laura. Hopefully she'll join us. So the idea of having doing this live together is there she is. The idea of doing this live together. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you.
It is because Laura and I met during a training that I was doing in Bristol many years ago. So I'm just going to bring this up a little bit. And there was almost an instant connection between us. And I really would like, what I like about bringing you on, Laura, bringing you to discuss this topic is because you have a very different way to approach it than the Western way. And I thought maybe you can start by telling you a bit, maybe we should you should introduce yourself briefly, and then maybe we share about how we met, and then we start talking about closing the bone. Just briefly, what we want to talk to you about is, what is closing the bones, what's its history, what does it do. We want to share stories of experience we've had giving it to women. And then, of course, one of the things we'd like to invite you to do is please do ask questions. Please do make comments. We'd like to make it as interactive as possible. So, yeah, Laura, why don't you just introduce yourself?
Right. So, so my name is Laura. I come from Colombia. I've been living in the UK for 10 years and slowly finding my way through practicing here with all the difference that implies, but bringing some of the stuff I learned and I practice living as a doula in Colombia, being a massage therapist, working with ceremony, working with ritual, working with symbolism, and I've been trying to weave that into everything that I've picked up from here too, which is equally as valuable. And it just enriches the practice really. So one of the ways in which I first did it was going to your closing the bones workshop, because I had learned this technique back at home where it is like, it's just normal, like standard postpartum practice. But as I was mentioning before, when we kind of drew the outline for today, it really comes, even the teaching of it is so different and the approach to it is different. So it was very valuable to me to experience your training, because it kind of like appeased some of my like Western questions around it. But I feel that as we kind of connect these two approaches, the practice just grows and grows into places that I didn't even imagine when I first learned it, because I've taken these to very, very diverse places.
Yeah.
And I practice this wrapping and this rocking and all of these techniques in different settings with different people. I practice it with men, I practice it with young adults, and it just is so powerful, so rich, so like abundant in the ways that it affects the body and the psyche.
Yeah.
That is just like, it's just a territory I continue to explore the more I dive into it. So that's how we met, and then we really clicked, and we've been in this communication. I sometimes feel it's really weird that I think I've only seen you that one time.
Yeah, I know. So
like, in real life, but it feels funny because I feel like I feel we've seen each other so much more, and it's because we can kind of continue to just exchange experiences.
And I kind of sort of supported you since the birth of your baby. Like,
Absolutely.
online.
No, like you've
I
been
still
there.
remember when you were like messaging me saying what was happening, and I was like, "Yeah, this baby's coming," and I was like basically in the toilet from doing an antenatal interview, person like a doula interview in a cafe with a couple, and then I was like excitedly like, and I wanted to like look at my phone, but also be present to this couple, and I was like. After asking afterwards, you said, "Yeah, baby's arrived and everything's good." Yeah.
I appreciated that very much. It's funny how this was such a weird time because I gave birth during COVID.
Yeah.
So I had a lot of support. It was all online, but I felt so
I
held
know we had the
by
most beautiful
it was great. Like
mother
I had
blessing when we had your mother blessing on Zoom. It was really beautiful.
it was, yeah, it was, and I had like the blessing of having so many female voices around me, very experienced ones as well. So I'm so like proud of like cultivated all these relationships because when I needed it the most, and I was very lonely in my like throughout birth and postpartum, which is obviously not ideal as we know.
No.
But still, like I felt really held by the wisdom of all the women around me, including yourself. So I was never like scared, and I had BBA. I had a birth before arrival because my midwife didn't show up, and then there was a whole thing with that. But I was never, I never felt lonely. I never felt scared, and that's how strong this wisdom like really is. That it permeates everything, and it's all the time around me like a network, and that holds me evidently. Yeah.
Do you want to start by tell us from your perspective what closing the bone is, and then I can bring my perspective to that.
Right. So this ceremony I first learned, as I said, when I was working as a doula, and this is just traditional postpartum practice in which the women in charge, which sometimes are not like midwives or doulas, but just the women in charge, being grandmothers or mothers or whatever, come to give your body and your soul some comfort after birth.
Yeah.
So the main, I guess the main purpose of the body work is to bring the body kind of back to its own, to the center, close it, because that's why it's called cerrar, closing the bones. Close the hips, the rib cage, and just bring all the organs kind of back to where they belong. But as well, there are a lot of elements that which try to just not bring the body back to its center, but the mind. And I think that is where the most like unexplored and richest aspects of this practice are. So traditionally, what we do is it includes a lot of other bits and bobs. So it can be quite extensive when you go to a home to do it, and you usually would go to a home to do it. You have a herbal bath, and in this herbal bath, what you're trying to do is to open up any like bitter memories that have been left in the body, any resistances, any frustrations, any pain. So you use like bitter herbs to bring them about. And then there's another bath which is also can be a steam as well, but it brings then sweet herbs to like sweeten the memories of birth, sweeten the experience of it all. And that's how it starts. So slowly warming up the body, because also this thing with the temperatures, as we know, is very important in any traditional health system. So the heat needs to come back into the body. So that's why we very slowly kind of warming up to that, using the steam, using the bath. Then there's massage, intense, like very warming massage with warming oils. To make the body sort of malleable. I always remember that one of my teachers said to me once when I first started like doing body work, She said the body is like a metal that will not move unless it's hot.
Yeah.
So you always need to like warm it up, and then you can work with it to make it malleable. So the whole process takes a lot of time doing this.
Yeah.
So the bath, the massage with the warming oils. And then of course there's the wrapping, the work with the rebosos,
So you don't
or the sheet.
You don't do rocking?
Yes, the rocking and the
rocking.
wrapping sort of come
After the
like this.
massage. Yeah.
Yeah, so you do the massage, and then over there we wrap with a sheet.
Yeah.
And because it's usually done by two people, then
Yeah.
you have one person on one side, one person on the other, and that's when you like tighten up bit by bit from the feet up. So the sheet kind of gives you the length.
From the feet up, not from the head down.
From the feet up, I think we do it. To be honest, I'll be super honest here. I've tried it both ways because I'm always interested in seeing. I've also started with the hips and then move outwards. I've done it the other way around, and I feel that it depends on how the body is behaving as well.
Sometimes I even ask, would you like to be, unwrapped, for instance, from the feet or from the head? But
yes, I think as all these practices, they are very obviously client dependent, and the situation will dictate. I remember even once being told also not all bodies need such extensive treatment after. Some bodies will just kind of slowly come back to themselves. So it's all it's not prescriptive as all these medicines are, they are all
I know, because one of the questions I often get asked, bearing in mind that I've taught this for 11 years now to over 1,000 women, it's like people always ask very Western question. I guess I used to ask that too, which is how long, how fast. Like people would like an answer after we rock this part of the body, the hip, for 3.5 minutes exactly at the speed of one, and I think that's because our whole education, and let's not go into this rabbit hole, but the whole parenting and education culture is about believing that there's a right way, and that is being taught by someone who knows.
Yes.
And for years, because of you, I started learning to do mostly by doing it. And then, I learned to do it with two different people. And then along the way, I learned with other people. And I always instinctively going, you need to do what that person does. And they know you don't, and I loved when I went to learn with Mexican midwife now living about 3 years ago. And she was like, when people were asking that question, how tight, and you said everything that people were asking, how do I, and people are like, you just ask a woman. She was like that, and I was like, this is so empowering because you can't do it wrong. I think there's also with that wanting to have very clear guidance, wanting to be taught exactly how to do it. There's also a lot of fear of doing it wrong.
Yes.
And I also remembered that you told me you learned to do the massage intuitively, and then we came to the UK and you went to do formal massage training, not mine, but some mainstream massage. And you said you hated the sort of very you must do this movement in that order, because for me it's the same as you. I'm like reading the woman's body and going, and sometimes I don't even know why something's going to come out of my mouth, or I'm going to do it differently. I never forgotten. I'm not trying to keep an order. I'm going to try to keep an order. I've written a list because I know we can get lost in big rabbit holes. But the first time I instinctively told a woman to unwrap herself instead of unwrapping her, she said afterward it'd been extremely significant for her that I said that, because she was a survivor of sexual trauma, and there was something very re-empowering for her. But I have no idea why. This I said to this woman, would you like to unwrap yourself? Because I'd never done that before. And again, things like that happens when you really work intuitively with women, and you open your mouth and stuff comes out, and you don't really know, or you do something and you don't really know where that comes from. And it's hard, when I tell a lot of my students, it's hard to trust that. And the only way to trust that when you haven't been brought up in that model is to practice and practice and practice. And then you start seeing that intuition come out. And
Yeah, it's hard though. I found as in the beginning when I started my training, I found this very frustrating because
Oh, yeah.
obviously
Yeah,
when you come from like an education model that answers all the hows and the whys and how long for and all that, I found it very like wasteful, like the time that I would spend chatting to someone because I wanted to like, but what is the information? Like, give me the key information, and this information seemed to never come. Like it's just like this really, very long chats going on
wax
all
on,
sorts of
wax
tangents.
off.
And I was like, yeah, and I'm like, but like, when are we gonna like learn? So, and this happened to me. This has happened to me in different scenarios, not only with the closing, but massage and everything. Because whenever you go to learn from these other perspectives, that's the first thing you'll find. It's not like, oh, I'll do a 2-day course and then I'll magically like know everything there needs to be known, because also the information is not delivered in that way. It's more about practice, it's more about doing the work, it's more about being present and kind of learning by yourself to trust. And that is something that I want to rescue from what you were saying, is trust is the key word here, as both as a practitioner and as a recipient of these techniques. I wanted to share that last year, my cousin's wife gave birth back in Colombia. They had lived here for a very long time, and then they decided to go back, and they became parents there. And she had all this postnatal care that wasn't done by any like doulas or midwives or any sort of official practitioner, but like her mom, her aunts, her sisters, etc. And it was all that I would have told her to do, like we chatted about it, and I was like, yeah, they know. and some things I remember because we have this family chat group, and she said, and I also did this and I also did that, and people would ask like, but like, why? And she was like, I don't know, because these women, they have all had kids and they said to do this, so I did it too. And I think that is one of the key points there. I thought when you are still in that sort of mindset, you trust inherently and you have people to trust. Coming from that Western perspective, we don't trust to begin with, and then we don't know whom to trust, and is there anyone there out there that we can trust? And that's why we're so like evidence-based, and we need all this data, and because otherwise we cannot. And I understand it, because obviously this has been broken systematically over centuries, and that's where the clash comes from, I think, from like that perspective of like having loads of information about it or having loads of trust in it, just completely
and
different
I think
pathways.
Given the culture we live in, in the UK, we need, in the UK, and this is true for anywhere else in the Western world, we need a bit of balance of both, because it's not easy to trust something you've never had before.
Absolutely.
And when the only model you've got is like, we call it a massage, but it's much more than a massage. It's a healing ritual. And the number of times, if I had £1 for every woman who said to me, I thought I was just getting a massage.
Yeah.
Especially post loss, or not just that, but one of the things I wanted to share, like to add to what you just shared, is I learned the first year in 2013 when I learned from both the Mexicans via British doula and the Ecuadorian via Dr. Rocio Alarc on the Ecuadorian version of Closing the Bone. There was no talk about any why you do that, any anatomy, any this and that. For me, because I was a scientist, I was like very frustrated. Like even today, sometimes people say to me, "Is there anything I can read?" I'm really toying with the idea of writing a short self-published book about it because there's nothing. There's no published stuff. There's basically, apart from lots of articles I've written to explain it, and a few other people who have written blog posts, there's no published science. None.
Nothing.
Apart from some very minor one on binding the hips done by this French midwife.
I read it.
So I went and I was like, me, my typical self, trying to understand what it did anatomically, but also trying to like soften my imposter syndrome. Do you see what I mean? Like, again, I think we live in a culture, you need to go to the head to trust that you can do it.
Yes.
And so the working with Teddy the osteopath, which led to, in fact, the massage that you learned was the one called postnatal recovery massage, which is done on a massage table, which Teddy and I created together. It helped me understand, having Teddy tell me it does this, it does that, it helped me validate the thing.
Yes.
I needed that at the time. Now I probably wouldn't, because I've grown into being much more into traditional women wisdom. But I think I also feel it's needed in our world to help people feel safe.
Yes.
It's quite crazy. And then the other thing that I found utterly fascinating is the first ever postnatal recovery massage that Teddy and I taught together in January 2019, or 2019, was it 18? Whenever that was. Then there's a lot of students who said to us, this has the potential to reach out more people because it feels more normal, because it's done on a massage table rather than being done on the floor.
And it follows some specific steps, and there's some reasoning behind it, and it's easier to. And I agree, like, like even me coming from a country where this is like more common and not questioned as much, I still like, I took a lot from that, because practicing here, I kind of sort of needed that at that point, because it just makes it more accessible and it helps people relax about it. And the funny thing, anyway, is that if you explain it and you explain the physical benefits, like in that way that like Teddy broke it down, which is very like approachable and very easy to digest, still you kind of have to have it to fully understand what's going on there. And it's what you said, like, people think still it's just some body work that they're gonna have, and then it's like the face of like, oh my god, like, what was this, like how could this feel so amazing? Because the technique is quite simple.
I know.
And I feel that it sounds a bit like daunting, no, like closing the bones. And I think that's why like insurance companies don't like it, because it sounds like you're gonna do something like really terrifying and manipulating and stuff. But the technique is so gentle.
I know,
and it's so intuitive.
One of the things Teddy reassured me when I'm so glad that in the early days of practicing this, I could go to him and say, what about this? What about that? And and he would always say, but this person's going to be desperate for treatment. Like the balance of what I always tell my students now is, when you're not sure whether to do it or not, ask yourself, what's the advantage of doing it? What's the risk of doing it? But also, what's the risk of not doing it? Because there are lots of women struggling with trauma, with physical pain, with all sorts of stuff, and not doing it would be unethical.
Absolutely.
And again, one of the things we've not touched upon yet, which and then that in a bit I'd like to go to, like, talk about closing the bone word, but we've not touched upon this. When we were preparing for this chat, you were saying to me that people in culture where it belongs to, they don't even question, they just do it. And one of the things that has blown my mind over and over again, and I talk extensively about that in my book, Why Postnatal Recovery Matters, is that it's absolutely mind-blowing, given the changes the body goes through in pregnancy and birth, and then in the postpartum, that there is no standard form of bodywork in the Western world anymore, to help make sure, as you said, that all the organs go back where they belong. Like, if men gave birth, there would be some kind of bloody Cambridge professor of the postpartum, and there would be a systematic thing to treat it. And so, one of the things that my research has showed me, because again, it's not classic research, it's more like gathering stories and hunting into rabbit holes, and because like traditional women's wisdom's often not written about, but what I've found is that there's evidence of similar practices in every continent.
Yeah.
So when people hear about closing the bone, they often think it only comes from Mexico. Yeah. Some people think it comes from South America, and then what I found is versions in Africa, versions in Russia, versions in Asia, and the most exciting bit for me last year was finding this French doula who'd done the same research I'd done in rabbit holes and books that have nothing to do with it, and things, and letters, and historian work rather than scientific work, anthropological work. And she found the French version of that, which makes complete sense. When I've had women say to me, "Oh, we don't have that in our ancestry," and I'm like, you do. It's been erased, and it's very sad because, as you say, things would have just been done and nobody talked about it, and now it's a big deal. And the number of times I've had women who come from culture like India or often it's in Indian culture, but I've also had the funniest stories of women from Morocco, like Moroccan ancestry. So women who come from culture where they still exist today, and then their mother or their auntie or their cousin, usually older women, say, you need to have this thing. And they're like completely dismissive because they go like old-fashioned grandma. Yeah. And the funniest story was this woman, literally 5-minute walk from where I live in Cambridge. She said to her mum, "Where I'm going to find someone to do that here." And she found me. So she found me, who has learned the stuff from South American traditions, right? But I also did learn the Moroccan version in a workshop. So I've obsessively gone to try and learn as much as I can from as many cultures and look at the similarity as difference. To think all the way around back to this woman, because she comes from a place where, she's immigrant, and she comes, and every single time when I've done it to women who come from culture where it still exists, every time afterwards they go, "Now I understand why my grandmother / auntie people relatives telling me to stop it."
Even in Colombia, because this is like, you'll find this obviously more in the more rural the community, the stronger this is still. Obviously, when you move into cities, people will be also disconnected from this knowledge in the same way, and it's still a process to.
With the dismissal that is a peasant thing.
Yes, a peasant thing or an old grandma.
Modern, not modern, not this.
Not science based. Yeah. And this is the same with all like everything that is self-care for women, like menstrual health, womb care, all of these. That is like, for example, the thing about wrapping when you are on your period, which is like honestly something that every grandmother around the world would be aware of, but suddenly it's become like this old-fashioned kind of like story.
But it's very sad because actually it harms women.
Absolutely.
Not to have this knowledge. Like every time I teach people about the wrapping, so there's another funny story in passing. It's not directly closing the bone stuff, but Laura shared with me a belt called a chumbe belt, which is Colombian traditional indigenous belt. That it was so good. It wasn't you who shared with me. It was a friend of yours who had been to a workshop with your midwife, I think. Basically, you showed me you had this belt, and then I tried it and found it so amazing. I went to a Mexican rebozo maker and said, "Could you make me some of those belts?" And they did, and now they're very popular. But they're tradition. They're your tradition. So I mean, they're a copy of the traditional Colombian chumbe belt. And the full circle stuff is I found a French woman who's like a Greek ancient Greece specialist who found similar belts in ancient Greece. And in the process with a seamstress, they've recreated a copy of this kind of ancient Greece belt, which she said were worn under the clothes, so therefore there's no depiction of it. They get lost. But one of the things I'd like to touch on, and before we can get into more stories about closing the bones and what it's for and how it helps especially, is I'd like to touch on your personal I have my own, but what do you think? Where do you think it came from in Colombia, for instance?
There's two very like specific sources there that have kept this alive,
Yeah,
and one is like the Black
yeah,
communities. So it's kept by Afro descendant midwives, uh, who mainly live, specifically the ones that live in the Pacific area of the country.
yeah.
So they're like keepers of these tradition,
Traditions.
and then there's the indigenous
Yeah,
population and their techniques, but they cross over, as you said, like
yeah,
so I don't even know if this is something that, like, for me, this is not like, it's originally from here, it's originally from there. It's just like a when there is a tradition of health and care and body work, this will come
yeah,
up because it's everywhere.
yeah,
Uh, and same with these things about the cold and not getting cold. Like
yeah,
I've seen them in
yeah,
so many places that I don't even know if you can track them as they're originally from here or from there. But it just does it not just make sense
yeah.
to
But again,
that's
is it not a Western thing to say we want to know exactly where it comes from?
exactly
And the bottom line is that it's cross-cultural. So
I think
again, I
so.
really want to undo the idea that people say it only comes from here because
I don't think it only comes from anywhere
yeah,
specific, because I've seen different so many different practices in such different cultures, and it always comes down to sort of like the same
yeah,
technique and the same principles. So and as you said, this existed here too. It's just that it's been erased for so long that we kind of now regard it as something really exotic, but it's just women's care.
yeah,
That's what I think.
yeah. And it's not a luxury. I think the thing that's really important to convey is that it's not just nice to have, it's a need.
It is quite tragic the way in which women's care has been. I've been thinking about this a lot and talking about it on my Instagram. It's like uh, Western medicine, and I don't like it calling it Western medicine anyway, because also, I mean, what is that even? It's like a patriarchal medicine, colonized medicine. I don't know.
Yeah,
Has like taken all this away, and completely neglected women.
oh, yes.
Absolutely, like no research, no nothing. We're treated as like inferior male bodies.
But even
So it's
worse, when you look at the published research, when I was writing my book and I was looking at the published research on traditional practices around the postpartum, around birth and the postpartum, the tone of the paper is like, this is not evidence-based. It's the tone of the paper is like, this is beliefs of
beliefs.
savages,
Yeah,
right? And
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and and there's this really interesting dichotomy between the belief that in the West, we need to be only Cartesian, controlled, always well put together, always like looking like we're not losing our shit, and then the belief that the indigenous people, they're like shaking drums and
Yeah,
dancing and looking like in trance, like the fear of
yeah,
trance, that's
yeah.
something again in this type of work it touch onto that because we want to remain constricted. We want to remain, together. We don't want to lose, because again, when you practice closing the bones, and then we maybe should talk about the physical, but I can't help physical, then emotional, then energetics. But I can't help but talk about that. It's like it's not unusual for women to have enormous emotional release during this
Absolutely,
type
yes.
of practice because
That is so needed. I mean, I just think that medicine does not understand that. I fear there's a danger with how we call things like natural. So like it's natural to go through the menopause. It's natural to menstruate. It's natural to give birth. Well, yeah, that it is natural, but that doesn't mean that that there's no care
yeah,
around it, or that the body can cope without absolutely any care. One thing is it being natural, and the other is that it still needs certain practices to function properly.
yeah,
And so here, like, we've been left with nothing because that was taken away and then replaced with absolutely nothing. Because it's like, oh, you had a baby, okay, off you go.
I know, and it's
Sort
crazy
yourself out.
because not only are people completely like blind to the fact that what we have is not normal, but when women then want to have it, that what I'm basically sharing is that when I started gifting copies of my book to pregnant women, and then they would then support them into like making a recovery plan. And when they ask family members, so for instance their mother, for, you know, rather than gift for the baby, to like give towards the care for them, like give towards closing the bone massage, for example, the women said, well, I didn't have any of that. Almost like, I struggled, so you should struggle too. But like really hard to understand, but no curiosity, wanting to buy the baby stuff again. You know, instead of like see a lot of my clients meeting a lot of resistance from family members around their request to having nurturing. And again, the thing that when you were talking about natural, people often say, well, pregnancy is normal, you're not sick, you know, like, and yet when you look at cultures, so the cultures that have the closing of the bones, in my experience, and that, you know, the one I know the most about is Chinese, because my husband's from Hong Kong. But I found to be the same in every culture that still has those traditions, and there's many places still in the world. Then they think not having those things is nuts.
Yeah.
It's not just a closing the bone thing. It's a whole month where you don't lift a finger, and then people care for you. They cook you really specific food, and to help recover the nutrients you've lost by growing a whole new person. You know, like you've made a new person. There's people should be like peeling you grapes and treating you like a goddess. You know?
No, and it is like that. If you, wherever you explore a bit deeper, it is totally like that. Like I was telling you about, my cousin's wife. She was like, she honestly didn't move a finger, and there's loads. It's not. I find it really funny that people meet the closing of the bones and that with such resistance, not knowing that that's like a minuscule part of the crazy stuff that happens during postpartum traditionally. Like you can't get cold, you can't even touch cutlery because it's cold, you can't do this, you can't do that,
you can't drink, and you can't even wash your hair,
you can't wash your
you can't drink
hair,
anything cold
it
for a month. You know, but it was really quite sweet. The autumn that's just passed, I did about 6 or 7 closing the bone massage to a new mother from India, and she'd had a baby very, very early. So the whole thing had been really traumatic. And her mother was there, and she was showing me all the stuff she was cooking for her, and I didn't know what they were because it's like plants I've never heard of. Do you see what I mean? But it was like clearly still this knowledge of all of this. But I'd like to go back to the closing of the bone, and let's talk about what do you feel it does, you know, physically, and then we'll talk about emotional and energetics.
Physically, first I think, it makes the body, as I said, warm again, which I think is vital for the well-being of the womb, because you lose all this heat when you give birth via like all the tissue you shed, etc. So it makes you warm, it makes you soft. You know, and I don't know if that's what does that mean? It makes you it makes your tissue soft, like you've been holding this baby for so long, and everything in your body is like kind of tense. Everything is trying to keep things together. So your body really is tight, and you went through birth, which is insane. The movement that takes place there, the amount of strength that you need to go through so it gives the body a chance to soften up and really relax. So by the warmth and the rocking and all that, the body starts to soften up, and once the body is soft again, it will be willing to kind of come back to its let's say normal sort of state. It releases lots of tension. I specifically think obviously because there's so much work around the hips, the alignment changes dramatically. Like people feel so much more like stable. Anything that has happened around the sacrum, which is really important, again softens up and releases tension. The rib cage is this is everything, isn't it? It softens your
the
it
rib
sof-
cage is like that.
like that, yeah.
Yeah.
So the rib cage kind of comes back to where it belongs, and then the
And
breathing is also more
and then you think
stable.
about all the organs that are like slowly working themselves well. Because one of the questions I get asked often is how soon after birth, and I was told within hours. And
Yeah,
so when I started, the soonest I've ever done is 24 hours post birth. In the case of typically somebody who's had a straightforward vaginal birth, and typically it's somebody that I've already given them a massage, and this is an ex-baby, and they already know what it does. And then I've seen the difference it makes in where the organs are. Like
the bladder.
the bladder, the uterus, all the guts. So I never forgot one day, 24 hours post birth, I'd massaged this new mother, and then I'd left her all wrapped up like a burrito. And I went in another room, and then I just got a text on my phone saying, "Can you come and unwrap me?" And I was like, "Really? Like, don't you want to just enjoy the relaxation?" And she was like, "I need a poo." Because often women haven't opened their bowel post-birth, and it's because everything is still jiggling down. So the bowels, my theory is the bowels don't quite work.
I know it's so weird. Like you're
Everybody
so
who's given a baby, as a baby, knows the first poo is really scary.
super scared. They're like the worst.
I know, and so having that can, but it's simple things like when you touch the lower abdomen, where you can feel everything is still not in place, and then the more you do it, because it's also traditionally not done just once, it's done several times, and then you can see the difference. I love how I've done the most. I think I've done is 6 times on the same women, and I love how when I've done this, I can see the building up, that softening that you were talking about. When I have had women who were so tense that they couldn't let me, as part of my massage, I also massage this part.
Same.
And it was so tight, hard, like a rock, that the women would not let me massage her because she was so, and often it was more like an emotional tension than a physical tension.
Yes, absolutely. I find that I've had some really wonderful experiences obviously doing all this work, and I find that always any massage around the chest comes to like a lot of tension and pain here, of like just emotional just resistances just lodged into the chest. And I remember I had this one client that because I work a lot with the voice as well, I was like massaging, and as I massage her, I invited her to like vocalize and maybe say or something, and then she started very like shy, as you do anytime you have to do voice work. But then this was like massive so like there was so much release, and then she cried, and there was a lot stored there. But that wouldn't have been possible without that kind of like the softening that the touch provides. So definitely an opening. Also, obviously, when you work around here, I feel, specifically talking about physical stuff, when you give yourself the chance to work around this area, the shoulders, which have been carrying so much, will like naturally fall back to where they belong. And for me personally, something I enjoyed a lot, and I enjoy giving, is like that move in which you like slowly sliding from the pubic bone upwards. Because I feel that is just such soft, beautiful work, but everything inside you feels that. Because everything, there's so much space inside, isn't it? Like once you just had a baby, and it seems like everything is like swimming in there. And it's like so much space.
I mean, the most extreme example of that I like to share is that one of my friends, she had triplets vaginally at 32 weeks pregnancy, and she said so the babies got taken to NICU, and when she stood up to try and walk to see her baby, she couldn't breathe, and nobody knew what to do. That there just was a woman in the ward who said, "Oh yeah, I had the same thing after I had twins, and I felt I couldn't breathe because literally everything falls down. Like your diaphragm just plops down." And having heard that, she got someone, I think it was I can't remember the story exact details, but someone wrapped her up with a big tubby grip, and then she could walk and breathe again.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
obviously extreme because not everybody has triplets, but the same thing I believe
Yeah.
happens. And again, you know, in cultures around the world, I remember now Livy Never showing a wrapping in the pregnancy, and I said, "Do you do the wrapping in the postpartum?" And she said, "Well, not really, because most of the time the women are not up on their feet. They are
Yeah. Exactly.
resting. They are being treated like a
Yes.
queen. You know, everybody's like caring for them,
Yeah.
and they don't need the wrapping because they're not on their feet. But she said they do need the wrapping if they are
Yes.
if they're not
And
able to be cared enough for by other people. And again, that knowledge is so there. You know, I would always remember my mother-in-law, who was 90, you know, a few years ago, showing me how in Hong Kong, when she had my husband, they showed her how to wrap a belly with a towel.
yeah.
And midwives in the UK telling me that they used to encourage in the 1980s women to lie on their bellies on the bed to help the organs come back to place, right? So there's all that stuff, you know, that's and of course, because you know everything is linked. You know, I want to share a story that for me really links the physical and the emotional. That I was called to do closing the bone to a very new mother a few years ago, and she was only like 5 or 6 days postpartum. She was very young, in her 20s. She was very fit. In fact, if she didn't have a baby and the black line on her belly, I would have thought this woman hasn't had a baby. But she called me to say, I can't stand up since I gave birth. I'm like stooped like an old woman. And I felt instinctively that it was energetic rather than physical. Because sometimes women call me and I'm like, you need to go and see an osteopath.
Mm-hmm.
This is
Mm-hmm.
outside of my skill set, you know, when it's clear there's something like a dislocated
Yeah.
coccyx, something like that. Anyway, I go to see this woman, and halfway through the massage, and again, this is one of those moments where I open my mouth and I don't know who's talking. It's not me. And I say, "What happened to you when you were born?" And then
Yeah.
she just said, "I nearly died." And then she just cried and cried and cried and cried. And then when the massage was finished, she was straight like an arrow.
Yeah. It's
The
amazing.
birth, you know, one of the things that, again, where closing the bone is beautifully suited to treat anything that's happened around the birth. This is not just that your birth
Yes.
has affected your bodies. The birth, when you give birth to your own baby, it triggers back memory of how you
Yes.
were born. And that's,
Yeah.
again, like a whole other topic, because that's not at all acknowledged in our culture, that how you came into the world. And, you know, again, this builds onto each other, how you
Mm.
came to be born, and then how you came to have your first bleed, and then how you
Everything.
came to be a mother, and all of that,
Everything.
they all build on each other. So how you were born going to affect how you bleed affect
Yes.
how you birth, all of this affect how you enter and navigate the menopause, the perimenopause, because the
Totally.
perimenopause is like puberty but the other side.
Yes.
And all of that, and again, it's I'd love to do some research to find out if traditionally there would have been, because I know there would have been things to do around the menstrual cycle,
Oh
and I'm
yeah.
sure there would have been things to nurture the body around the perimenopause as well.
Yes, I think what that's another, let's say, key element about that when you talk about here like to talk about closing the bones, and
Yeah,
so it happens that you cannot talk about closing the bones without talking about all this other stuff.
everything. Yeah,
And that is what happens with traditional medicine.
yeah,
Is like you cannot just dissect the parts of the
mm-hmm.
body or the moments that you're going through, the specific processes. You have everything is encompassed, and it's very unlikely that you can treat something just like
Yeah,
specifically,
yeah,
because nothing just lives there and attached or anything else. And specifically when you're going through postpartum, there's so much stuff coming up, as you said, from your experiences with the menstrual cycle, with your experiences from your own birth,
and from the
trauma
whole
you
like
endured.
change of identity that comes with becoming a mother.
Absolutely.
And you know, sometimes I've done the closing the bone to women who had beautiful birth, and yet there was all this stuff that came out around, you know, loving their baby but finding it so hard.
Yeah, God, yeah.
And that again, it's all taboo, right? We're supposed to pretend that everything is happy and stuff. So yeah, emotionally for me, physically we've already covered some of that, and there's more to it, obviously. But
Yeah.
just to touch on one thing, when you were saying women are at their hips more together afterwards, I've had countless times that women have texted me after I've left their house and say, "Oh my God, it wasn't until you left and I stood up and I
Mm-hmm.
realized I can walk so much better."
Mm-hmm.
But on the emotional front, for me, what it's beautifully suited to do is to provide a space to be witnessed and a space to, well, on a simple level, I think that's also physical as well as emotional, reteaching the body what it feels like to be safe. Because there's
Yes.
something about the closing the bone that's very significant in terms of when you take it into the context of the polyvagal theory. I've written an article
Yes.
about that on my blog. The polyvagal theory of the nervous system, and how the sort of touch and the rocking and the wrapping, all of these things are very primal sensations.
Yes.
And that's also probably why I added the drumming, sorry, I'm just pointing at one of my drums, because all of these things is sort of primarily, it reminds you of being in the womb. And
Yes.
that's why it feels, that's why your body, that's why I promise women when I don't want to over promise, because I don't want people to think it's going to fix all their shit. But I'd rather that people are pleasantly surprised. But what I can say to women, that I can guarantee this is going to make you feel relaxed. And I've had such fascinating experiences in that, that often I arrive and women feel so dysregulated,
Yes.
um,
Absolutely.
which is also a normal response when you're on your own with a newborn baby and
Oh
nobody's
yeah.
caring for you.
Yeah.
And then the difference it makes, just that, just the sort of the system, the body just remembering what it feels like to be safe.
Yeah.
And therefore, from that place, as you say, softer place, then emotion can come out that we're not even being acknowledged,
Yes.
because again, women are, because of the lack of care, women are blaming themselves for feeling like shit instead of
Totally.
seeing it as a healthy response to a lack of nurture.
Yes. This is a very. This is one of the most radical effects of this sort of body work, is that it yeah, its main thing, I would say, is that it takes you back to that place of
Mm,
safety. And from that angle is that I've decided to use it in more context than just postpartum, because
exactly.
it works in so many levels. But definitely when you have just had a baby, I think there's something like really tragic about the way we approach postpartum. It's like, oh, I decided to have this baby, and whatever I'm feeling is a failure, that I, because of, I am not, whatever, I'm not happy enough, I don't
Not
feel well enough.
fulfilled.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's just because I'm not doing this properly. It's not is so it's all individual, because we live in an individualistic culture. And there's no time in which we consider that maybe it's because after we've done this massive thing of bringing a new human into the world, maybe someone should be looking after us. And I find that wild, because it's such a dramatic
I
thing that happens
know.
to your psyche, to your body. It's like, how are we expected to just do
Get
it
on with it.
on our own and
Yeah.
just get up and go? And people in our culture kind of praise that a lot as well. It's like,
Oh
oh,
yeah.
she's out and about and blah blah, she only gave birth
Back
like
to
3 days,
normal.
being normal. Yeah. And I'm like, great. When I'm thinking like, yeah, you should be in bed and
I know, I know.
not moving
It's
at all.
absolutely crazy. I'll never forget, a story I tell in my book, which is a new mother who had a 3 month old and a 3 year old, and she said, "I don't understand why I'm so tired." And I said,
Yes.
"Honey, you're
Yeah,
tired
like I
because
do
you have a
understand.
baby and a toddler." And she was like, "But everybody else is coping better than I am." And I'm like, "No, everybody else is pretending."
Yes, I
That's
don't
like
feel.
a really bad vicious circle. At least now there seems to be, accounts like that, like on Instagram. There's accounts of people
Yeah.
who are trying to show the
Yeah.
reality, warts and all, because again, it's, I have a French graphic novel that says exactly that. When this woman is like not coping, she's got a baby and a small child, and then she's hiding, she hasn't had time to have a shower, she's wearing hoodies to hide her unwashed hair, and then this women trying to invite her to have a coffee. And she thinks that because she only seen that women on Instagram, she's like the yoga teacher with 4 kids who's always pristine, and she thinks, I can't hang out with those people because they've got their shit together and I don't. And then when she eventually talked to the women, she realized it's not as tall as, because as one of the women said, yeah, when you feel happy, you go on social media and you go, but I feel happy. But you feel like shit, you don't go on social media to say that.
And isn't it also great that I guess one of other things I appreciate a lot about this treatment is that it makes space for those feelings to come out. And I think because maybe we think we're not coping, or maybe we think we are, but once you've done this treatment on someone, because I've done this even on women that have given birth months ago,
me too,
or years,
50 years.
Exactly, 50 years, and they'll still find it, like powerful and everything. And I think it's because you think you're coping, but you're not, and you only discover that when you are allowed to make some space for yourself, which when you had a child, you basically forget about making space for yourself. You don't have time, and no one wants to take care of you, so it's basically you're the main carer, and now there's no time for you and your feelings. So even if you think you are coping, I would assure that if you have a closing ceremony, whenever, and you allow those feelings to come out, they will come out, and they're there. That feeling of abandonment is very much there. Even years after you gave birth, if you make space for that in that moment, that will come out, and it always does.
And that's why it's so beautiful to have it at other times of life transitions. Because I remember a couple of years ago, my whole family had COVID.
So
I got it first, and then when I was still really unwell, they all got it, and I had to care for them.
I remember.
Really, really, really unwell. And then I luckily reached out to our community, and people delivered food and stuff. But I remember feeling exactly the same as I did as a new mother. I'm thinking, and I've done the closing the bones to women post, baby loss, which is a clear.
Me too.
But I've also done closing the bones post all sorts of traumatic experience, all sorts of life transition, all sorts of, I often say it's not just a postpartum thing. It's also beneficial to women who haven't yet had children. It's also beneficial to men. Like one of the memory that pops into mind recently is I was at a retreat, like an informal retreat for my dance community. And I hadn't planned to teach this, but people said, we were hoping you'd show us. So during one of the break, I just had one rebozo, and I wrapped a few people, just like the hips and the shoulders. In fact, somebody else had a rebozo, so we could do 2. And I remember this man, when I wrapped his shoulders, he just cried and cried and cried. And afterwards, I had no idea this was going to happen. And people don't know, and I've witnessed that. I've taught my entire community to do just the wrapping, and often I do it in women's circle. If I'm going to get just somebody to get in groups of 3 and just bind the hips, pull on the hips as a group of 3, so that the person can experience. Because again, that's what you say, it looks so simple, and then people don't get it until, when I did Now Live in Ava's workshop, which was 2022, I was in the middle of a mental health crisis of my own, and I got the wrapping, just the wrapping, the whole body, in as part of a workshop, so it wasn't like a treatment. And I remember finding it so profound.
It is amazing.
It was literally 10 minutes. Do you see what I mean? How much it did for me. And so I encourage people who have trained to do this to refer even parts of it, because I think the more women get to experience how powerful it is to be cared for and nurtured and held in a circle, and people just in my community now, we do it for people's birthday.
Oh my God, there's so many moments in which this is adequate. It's like I cannot, for me, this last year especially, is like been the year of Rebozo. Like I've taken it to every single workshop, like any women's circle, we've done it with carers, young carers. I've done it with, women. I've done it in one-to-one, because it takes a few minutes. and then you feel reborn. Honestly, the holding capacity of this simple, very gentle, loving technique is amazing. The transformation that takes place in those few minutes is amazing.
Yeah.
And it's just because you're allowed to be vulnerable
Yeah.
for a minute and
It's such an
receive.
answer to, again, one of the themes that have come to a lot through for me in the writing. So you know, I've written a book about women and drumming that's
Yeah.
coming out later this year. Is the whole way that the Western world only addresses any kind of emotional distress as if it's only here. And when you read around, I've read a lot around trauma the last few months, and when you read people like Gabor Mate and Peter Levine, you know, what is very clear, and that's something I kind of knew by doing the Closing the Bones as well, is that it's in the body, and
Yeah,
the
totally.
body's wise, and the body knows what to do to heal, provided that the space is being held for
Yes.
that to happen. And
Yes.
not this thing that we have where you need to go and spend, because last year I got given free talking therapy on the NHS and it was not doing anything. I did it because it was free, but eventually I dropped off because, and the woman was very kind, but I was like, what's this thing about talking and talking and talking endlessly about something? It doesn't move what's in the body.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
I've done, look, you know that being, well, how we are inquisitive and stuff. I've trained in like a 2 million different sorts
Yeah.
of like therapeutic tools. And one of the things that I always say is like, for me as a client, because I need this quite often to regulate, obviously, because I'm so sensitive and I was overwhelmed all the time. Anyway, for me, like I could, if I could choose anything to have, I will always choose body work.
Yeah.
Like if I can pay someone to give me something, it'll be body work every single time. And that's why I've also sort of like distance from other things that I do and come back to body work because that's where everything lives. I was saying to this, I was working with these parents on a tester for well-being the other day, and I was saying, look, even if you like self-massage a little bit every day, it's like your body carries everything, right? So everything. And the thing is, if you have to release it, you have to make moments to release it from the body so that it can then take on the next thing that happens to you.
I mean,
Because if
the
it
one
just
thing, you know, I just meant that I want to touch briefly because we're supposed to like wrap it up fairly soon. I want to touch briefly on the. I'm just looking at the clock. Yeah, I think we've been an hour already, so we should probably wrap it up within the next 5-10 minutes. It's like, you know, the energetics part of the closing of the bone, because again, in our culture, that's not at all within the understanding of people's things. But what's not also understanding is just like what you say, you know, you can grab stuff, you can absorb stuff that's not yours. You know, the one story that really blew my mind is in Gabor Mate's book, you know, it's called The Myth of Normal. He goes to like somewhere, I can't remember, I think it was in Peru or somewhere like that. He's supposed to be the one helping a group of doctors integrate an ayahuasca. So this is one of the more ethical places where people do it. And he takes a group of doctors and he's supposed to be the one who's going to help them like absorb, you know, integrate the plant ceremony. And the people there who do all the shamans who do all the treatment, they say, we can't have you in the space because your energy is so dark. You're stopping our work from working. And they take him away. And then he obviously he says how his ego really took the knock. But then they say another thing to him, and then they heal him one-to-one, and it does really powerful effects on him. But they say not only do you have something that you've not dealt with in terms of trauma since like you were very small, but because you've spent the last 30 or whatever years as a medico, which is because that's medic in Spanish, that you have not learned to remove all the stuff that you've absorbed from other people, and it's so dense and dark in you, and it's stopping all our stuff from working. And that again, you know, to come back to the simpler, you know, part of like postpartum or any of the kind of life endings and beginnings that happen through the life of women, is that we don't ever even take care of that. And then when you're pregnant, when you give birth, you know, your energy field kind of opens and grows to let the baby in. And the fact that, and there's nothing to like cleanse people of like energetic stuff, you know, especially when thinking of women who've had traumatic births and been badly treated by the system, that will have impacted them, not just physically and emotionally, but also energetically. So I'd like to hear what your experience of working with that is.
I think this is one of the reasons why we start this treatment with the plants, because the plants are there to serve that purpose, like to cleanse that energy field from all the things that you would have absorbed. Because any time during that experience, you would have had some fear, you know, some frustration. So there's so much happening that you carry a lot, and obviously there needs to be room to release that. So you start with the herbs, which are meant to cleanse all these, and as I said, like sweeten the experience. And this is at an energetic level. And we do the same with like houses and stuff, or there's loads of rituals in which you like pour honey over stuff because things need to be sweetened when there's been bitterness. So you do that, and then obviously the wrapping, what it gives you at energetic level is that kind of boundary that was that diluted in a way when you give birth, because obviously you have to be energetically so open to receive the baby, to birth the baby. You're completely open in any possible way, and what you need is to put that boundary there again. So obviously when you do this sort of treatment, what happens is there's a lot of release, and there's probably going to be tears and stuff, but then there is a lot of regained strength, like some sort of coming back to self and feeling strong, and especially feeling clearer. We all I think people sometimes like are too worried about like getting bad vibes from people. And I don't know if you can like reject vibes from people when especially when you're very sensitive, and when you are pregnant you are. But you will take on a lot, and as a woman and a carer, you take on a lot anyway, because you are caring about everything and everyone at all times. So one thing that I'll share is so Ramiro, which we've talked about extensively because he's the midwife who taught me how to do some of the stuff I do. He once gave me a massage, and he was like sort of reading my body, and he told me like, well, the thing with you is that your body is like, you have a lot of space inside. So imagine you're like an attic in a house, and people will like kindly put the stuff they don't need in there because you can hold it, because you have the space for it. But then if you don't take it out, then you'll end up with this massive pileup of people's shit inside of you. And I think that's what's happened to the mother. Because you're open, because you're willing to care, people's things just kind of naturally flow into you. And if you don't make space to decide, okay, what do I want to keep, if anything, then you will run out of room for your own energy. Does that make sense? And then you're just in an inside energetic and emotional clutter that you can't see straight because there's so much in there. So that's what happens when you make space for yourself, and that wrapping really, for me, kind of like recreates that boundary, and it kind of gives you permission to feel yourself in your individual space again. And then after you're unwrapped, it's like, oh, I now have so much space because I created a new boundary, or I strengthened this boundary. And so when you're unwrapped, what you feel is like you have all this space inside that is like new. No?
Totally. Mindful of the time, we should probably bring this to a close.
I mean, we can go forever.
I know. We're 3 hour live. We probably still not even covered what we want to cover. So I just thought maybe we can just you can tell people where they can find you if they want to have a massage with you.
So at the moment, I'm living in Pembrokeshire. If anyone out there who's listening is here, I'm focusing at the moment. My practice revolves around this. So pregnancy, postpartum care, menstrual care, perimenopausal care, all through body work. Because as I said, this is where I think we need the most. You can find me on here through my Insta if you want to message me through there. Most of my details are in there. You can email me to laura.leongomez@gmail.com. You can find me on Facebook, and I'm happy to do. I do work online as well sometimes with people, and I'm happy to do that as well. So yeah, if you ever feel like you need a good, I recently even went to Bristol to give some cerradas, like all the way to see two women. It was lovely. So just drop me a message if you feel like this is the sort of thing you need.
Yeah. And I want to share that I'm going to, I live in Cambridge, UK, so I cover within about 30-minute drive of Cambridge with my ritual. And I also do support women through the whole sort of life transition, not just birth, but like I consider myself a guide for women going through life transition. And I offer a mix of body work, energy work, drumming, and mentoring, often all mixed together, because I think that's what's most powerful. And I'm doing a closing the bone. I'm doing 2 workshops in March. On the first weekend of March, I'm doing a double Saturday and Sunday closing the bone workshop, and then Monday, the 31st of March, I'm doing the postnatal recovery massage with osteopath Teddy Brooks, which is the one that's taught on a massage table rather than on the floor. And I also wanted to say, so you can check on, on the link in my bio, there's a link to all of these things. There's a link to my blog. There's tons of articles about this on my blog. Then I've also got a podcast called The Wisdom Messenger, on which I've interviewed Laura about, I think we were talking about trance.
Yes, trance during birth.
And then I would like to say that if you are not in the Cambridgeshire or the Pembrokeshire area and you want to find somebody to close your bones, then you can just do a Google search, for your area. Usually people advertise it online, and if you're really struggling and you can't find somebody in your area, you're welcome to send me a message, and I can ask in my group of students who, if you send me your postcode, I can ask in my group of students, the people I've trained who covers the area. And there are people offering it outside of the UK. If you're watching this and you're not in the UK, just look up what's available in your area, because there seems to be, it's growing. It seems to be available in more and more places. Yeah.
And may I just say, even if you're not a practitioner, birth practitioner, massage therapist or whatever, and if you get the chance to learn how to do closing the bones, because this is a tool that you can take to use with your kids, to use with anyone in your family. It's just a tradition of care, and that we desperately need to build traditions of care, like as grassroots movements, not because health doesn't come from up there, it comes from within our communities. So do learn this if you have the chance.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we should
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Laura. Bye.
See you soon.